I wanted to talk about something today related to that very recent video I made about youth being wasted on your 20s. And specifically, I want to talk about Zoomers, male Zoomers. Now, obviously, there are some problems that occur with female Zoomers, a lot of stuff related to social media and what have you. But generally speaking, I'm never terribly concerned about the plight of women because they're going to be taken care of regardless. Now, at the end of the day, it's the men, specifically the youthful males, they're in a much greater pickle than any female might be, just because nobody gives a damn about them, typically. And that's really what this video is about. We're going to be talking about the reasons as to why there's such a huge gap between the Zoomers and previous generations, specifically Generation X and the so-called Boomers. Because it is absolutely astonishing when you think about the degree of disconnect that exists between the generations right now. And I think there are a few reasons for this, although there are two primary reasons. The first reason is a much larger overarching reason, and that is quite simply that there has been this cleavage that has occurred between the different socioeconomic and cultural classes that exist in the West, specifically in the United States. Many times I've referred to this as cultural speciation, and I think that's a real thing, which is to say the relationship between the ruling class, as it were, the upper classes, and their ability to relate and find familiarity with those quote-unquote beneath them has all but evaporated, or completely evaporated, better put, and there just isn't a connection there. It is looking at a completely different species, and in fact, I know of an anecdote of a bunch of Harvard academics a while back that wanted to investigate what blue-collar people are doing in the state of Massachusetts, to sort of relate to them, right? They head out there, they get to know the people, and they come to the conclusion that these people are basically aliens. They have nothing in common with us, and vice versa. They might as well be living on a completely different planet. And so this socioeconomic cultural speciation has a lot to do with the neglect we see in terms of the young Zoomers. Because typically, when you look at young male Zoomers that are struggling, they're either in a middle class or lower class milieu. They're typically not the children of wealthy, successful, highly educated Generation X or Boomer people, because those people exist in a completely different social stratum. And if you pay attention to things, I'll have a lot more to say about this in future videos, the only subspecies of human being these days that's doing reasonably well, all things considered, is that highest tier, highest echelon of socioeconomic, cultural, educational class, whether that class is left or right, although overwhelmingly they tend to be left, but regardless of their political affiliations, they tend to be doing quite okay, as are their children as a rule. I know of many such examples, both anecdotal and otherwise, that prove this. No, the people that are struggling in general are the people that don't belong in that class. And the people that are struggling most, you could argue, the people that have their whole lives ahead of them, the young male Zoomer. And so you have this massive social stratification occurring at the highest levels of society because these people no longer have a sense of stewardship, no longer have a sense of connection, and don't even want to connect to people that they regard as beneath them, as unrelatable, and as simply not worthy of their attention. That's one major issue here, which is why people can talk about the crisis of boys and the crisis of male youth and all the things that the male youth are not doing and should be doing, but nothing is done for them in order that they be helped, which is the main point here. And we see reflections of this throughout society. Recall eons ago that the Boy Scouts, yes, an exclusionary all-male unit as it were, dedicated to the growth of boys and understanding male camaraderie and cooperation, this sort of thing, was summarily disbanded in favor of creating a unisex organization that anyone can join. Males, females, girls, boys, doesn't matter. Mind you, all the while, paying attention to this, the Girl Scouts still exists, but it isn't unisex. Only girls can join the Girl Scouts. So we've seen over the previous decades this constant assault on male spaces and areas of life that are beneficial to men, above all young men, to give them an opportunity to grow, to get to know themselves, get to know other men, to learn the ways of the world as a man. You deprive them of this on a macroscopic level, and then you start asking, among other things, why are these young men not quote-unquote functioning as they should? Well, you created a world through your indifference and through your political ideology that is highly disadvantageous to young men. And deprivation early on can definitely have a long-term effect on people, whatever the nature of that deprivation. The other thing is, unfortunately, largely related to technological advancements. And you can't really pin the blame on anyone here. This is simply what we do as humans. We invent stuff, we throw it out there into the quote-unquote free market, and then we hope it works out. And usually it kind of works out, but there are always these side effects that co-occur with the things that we throw out into the market. It's a double-edged sword, as they say, and that's what's happened. The technology in general, whether it applies to Zoomers or other people, although not the very old because they're not really engaged with the technology, has outstripped our ability to adapt to it in a mimetic sense, which is to say the technology has taken over us. We haven't taken over the technology. We are hyper-reactive, responsive to environmental stimuli, and that's what this technology has done. It has screwed us over. What do I mean by this very specifically? I mean that, and this is a wild example, but bear with me, if you were, I don't know, maybe a Roman legionnaire during the height of the empire, or during the reign of Augustus 2,000 years ago, and you came back, you found a wife, and you knocked 2 kids out, both of them are sons, you might have a lot to teach your sons about warfare, about combat, about life in general. And almost everything you could tell your sons 2,000 years ago, say 10, 20 years later after the heyday of your own life, would have still been relevant, largely. In like manner, a medieval blacksmith would simply oftentimes pass on his trade to his sons, and they would become blacksmiths themselves. Maybe they learned something along the way, maybe not, but it was basically the same craft, basically the same trade, and basically the same life trajectory. And so fathers, in general, had a lot to teach their sons. I think they still do in certain ways. But by definition, given the slow advancement of technology and how that affects our psychology as human apes, by definition, there was less of a generational gap. And so fathers and sons and the general family relationship was all just much more relatable. Now, if you get someone who's a boomer, or maybe a very old Gen Xer, that's typically the parent age of a Zoomer these days, they have their own experiences, say in the mating and dating market, above all in the mating and dating market, as well as the employment market for that matter. And they'll chime in and tell you what they think. The problem is, a lot of it has absolutely nothing to do with the current environment that the Zoomers exist in. So even with well-wishing and good intentions, a lot of these older Gen Xers, boomer parents, have almost nothing useful to say to their children in terms of what they might do with their lives, and especially in the mating and dating market. And we know this. We've talked about this a lot. Even in my time, and I'm sort of in the last bracket of Gen X, it was a lot easier. You didn't need to be Chad Thunderschlang or be a millionaire or even be very wealthy to attract a female, to get some attention, to even have a relationship. It's very different right now overall. The mating market has never been as fierce as it is now. And as much as, say, a father who is in his 50s might have good intentions towards his son, who's a Zoomer, well, let's be honest, a lot of what he has to say just isn't relevant. And the saying, as you know, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is true. As we get older, we're more and more inclined to stick with our ways. I notice this about myself, too. There are things that would be beneficial to me to learn or to learn about, and I just don't really want to bother a lot of the time. Overall, I stick to the same games I'm familiar with, the certain genres, etc., etc. Now, part of this is fine. We all have our inclinations and our proclivities, and I don't think anyone should be faulted for that. But when it comes to understanding these complex cultural, socio-biological issues that exist between different generations, it's a different story. Now, I'm kind of fortunate and unfortunate in many ways, but I'd say fortunate in the way that some of my closest friends are actually Zoomers and relatively young millennials. and I'm significantly older. And so, because I care about my friends a lot, they're some of the most important people in the world to me, I have taken it upon myself to study and understand the environment that they exist in. And not just in a broad sense, but in a very specific sense at the individual level. I have a very good friend from Kansas, and I got to be honest, I've never been to Kansas, but I do my very best to understand the environment and the situation he grew up in. And to be honest, it's very grim, although he's more of a millennial than he is a Zoomer. So I take the opportunity to do this, and this is something that, for whatever reason, Boomer or Gen X parents, specifically fathers, don't really bother to do that. And I think a lot of it has to do with just being well established. They have their thing going, they're living their lives, they have their children, their families, their business, their job, whatever it might be. They have what they need. And unfortunately, necessity is the mother of all invention. And if you don't need to understand something, if you don't need to investigate something, you're not likely to do it. That's just how human beings work. In my own case, it's important to me that I understand my friends, as well as the fact that I run this channel. So it's important and incumbent upon me that I understand the lay of the land and the landscape as it exists today, as opposed to some quaint, antiquated version that I existed in decades ago. That's not reality anymore. And people need to come to terms with that. And it's from these major disconnects, these two major disconnects, the local level, the parental level, the inability to relate, because, again, necessity is lacking, as well as the macroscopic level, the forsaking of young men in general, and society just becoming more and more gynocentric, that we end up in a situation where, probably more than ever, the youth of today, the Zoomers, the late teens, the guys in their 20s, are just lost, which makes them particularly susceptible prey to gurus, people like Bathrobe Man, etc., etc. I believe ultimately that's the root of the issue here. And unless people are willing to bridge this gap, some of these parents that are Gen Xers or Boomers really make an effort to understand the lay of the land, that things have changed significantly, then there's not going to be much help coming from parents themselves. Because the generational gap that's emerged through technology and the way that technology has influenced and shaped the environment, it's just, they're basically beyond reach. And our so-called aristocracy, the so-called elites, they never gave a rat's ass about us to begin with, and they made the world a lot worse for all of us normal folk, but above all, for the young normal folk, young men out there. Which is why we have to pull our knowledge together and try to figure this out on our own as best as we can. There may be solutions, there may not be, although I tend to stick with the Thomas Sowell line of there are no solutions, only trade-offs, and that seems to be the case always. So let us embark on this quest of looking for the best trade-offs possible in the current climate, in the current environment. And thank you for watching. Special thanks to my patrons. You guys are the best. You keep the channel going. Really appreciate you guys, as I do all PayPal donors. You guys are great. And if you engage in the usual YouTube jazz of liking the video, commenting, subscribing, sharing the video, all those things help out the channel, as my channel does not get as much traffic as it should given the sub count. I am shadow banned. And until the next time, may the gods watch over you. If I'm still alive, I will check you out then. Take care. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.